So I'm reading a bunch of one-star reviews for books that I haven't read yet, books that I want to read, and I'm doing this because I don't know why. I've checked out one-star reviews before, and the one thing I found was that sometimes people are hilarious without even trying, and actually also some reviewers are really harsh. What's shaking? My name's Cam. If you like fantasy books, I would love it if you stuck around. Before I get into it, I'm just gonna say off the bat that obviously reviews are subjective. People can review a book pretty much however they like. Your experience reading a book is your personal experience, even if I strongly disagree with you, even if you strongly disagree with me. But of course, people are gonna fight about it anyway, so you know what. Let's start with the one-star reviews for a book I have actually recently read, Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. Video review here. Let's see what people are saying about a book that I felt pretty okay about. It was good. It was alright. It was fine. Since people are reviewing this hack's latest hackery, I will do the same. Hang on a sec, I feel like this needs a bit of a voice with it. Since people are reviewing this hack's latest hackery, I will do the same. Since all 3 million words he has written thus far have been terrible, I will assume that will be the same case with this thing. I'm gonna go out on a limb. Look, crazy thought, I'm gonna just throw this out there. I think this person isn't a huge Brandon Sanderson fan. Look, not everyone's a fan of Brando, and I can actually get that. I get it. And I know I just said that reviews are subjective, but if you haven't read the book, why do you review it? And I mean, you've obviously read quite a bit of Brando, and you didn't like his writing so far. It looks like you've at least read 3 million words and found it to be terrible. I would ask myself why you chose to read this one, but apparently you didn't read it, but you reviewed it. For some reason. I did not enjoy reading this book. Short, to the point, fair enough. So I've wanted to read Legends and Lattes for quite a while, and actually I think that is the next book that I'll be reading and reviewing on here, but I've held off because I just don't know if it's something that I'll actually like. I've gone on a lot about how I like and I would like to read more lighter, funner, low-stakes fantasy, but if I'm just judging this book by the cover alone, it looks a bit too low stakes for me. You know what I mean? Is that making sense? Maybe I'm wrong, but hey, that's what reviews are for, right? Let's have a look. DNF, high fantasy and low stakes. You don't get to name it fantasy, just telling that your ordinary people characters are orc, dwarf, succubus. Did this orc had to learn how to switch from her mercenary life, change the habits, and to become a cafe owner? Nah, this is story for you children how not to judge book by cover. Orc, disregarding any personal history, can be absolutely not what you expect her to be. Orc, disregarding any personal history, can be absolutely not what you expect her to be. Am I just really dumb, or does that not make any sense? This review does raise a pretty interesting question. If you write pretty much what is not a fantasy story in any other aspect, but you replace some of the characters with like fantasy creatures like orcs and dwarfs, whatever, does that justify it being a fantasy? And for me personally, I think, sure, why not? That very idea is the foundation for a lot of urban fantasy, as we know it, fantasy set within a real world, but with fantasy creatures and maybe magic. But again, having not read Legends and Lattes, if it is in every single other aspect not a fantasy, just with fantasy characters, is there any point in it being a fantasy? And I don't know, but at the end of the day, why not? That's just where I keep landing. Why not? I don't see the issue with that at all, as long as it's not boring. This was not cozy, this was boring. 11th Cycle is a book that's been kind of blowing up a lot right now, especially over on Twitter as far as I can see, and I think the main reason for that is the cover. It's sick. That's really all there is to it. The cover looks awesome. In fact, I've already bought it over on Audible, so that is, again, one of the next books that I'll be reading and reviewing here on the channel. But in the meantime, let's have a look. Let's see what other people are saying. DNF. The language is just too bad. Cringe-worthy descriptions, constant repetition, and Stephen King's arch nemesis, adverbs. Definitely feels like a high schooler's relatively good attempt at Dark Souls fanfiction. I gotta be honest with you, describing it as high schoolers and, in parentheses, relatively good, which confuses me as to why it was 1 star. Describing it as high schoolers' relatively good Dark Souls fanfiction sounds kinda sick. That sounds like a pretty cool way to hook a reader, if I'm being honest. Also, adverbs. Stephen King's arch nemesis. We all know he's said before that he's not a fan of adverbs. And I've said quite a few times that I'm kind of like... I'm a little bit in opposition to Stephen King there when it comes to adverbs, and as well when it comes to dialogue tags. I've actually found that as long as they're not used excessively, adverbs and dialogue tags can make a story more interesting. I can't really get into that without making it a whole other video, but I just think that when you spice up a bit of, prose or descriptive text with adverbs and dialogue tags, it can just give it a bit more flavor. But again, as long as it's not done excessively, because when you do it excessively, obviously it distracts the reader from what's actually happening. That's my thoughts. I would just say to keep in mind that one author's idea of bad writing isn't objective truth. So this book called Babel blew up quite a while ago. Now, it doesn't have as interesting a cover as 11th Cycle, in my opinion, but it blew up. It was over on Book Talk and, Twitter, everywhere, on YouTube as well. A lot of people were reviewing it on YouTube, and I've heard a ton of mixed feedback about this one. I'll read the description for you in just a moment, but what I've heard so far, without, again, having read the book myself, is that it came off very, very preachy. I don't know if that's true, but in fantasy, that is a trap that sometimes authors fall into. For Robin, Oxford is a utopia dedicated to the pursuit of knowledge, but knowledge obeys power, and as a Chinese boy raised in Britain, Robin realizes serving Babel means betraying his motherland. Okay, so obviously this book deals with racially built power structures, and I mean, if you read the description for this book before going into it and knowing that, I imagine you should expect some level of preachiness, but I haven't read it, so I don't know, maybe it is too preachy. Anyway, let's see what people on Goodreads are saying about it. All I'm gonna say is this: I'm too dumb for this. Oh, that's great. I love that. Racism. Just racism. Can't trust Book Talk. Well, there's a sentence I'm getting very used to hearing. Book Talk. What's the deal with Book Talk? I've heard about a bit of a double standard when it comes to Book Talk in regards to which authors they'll promote for whatever reasons, and other authors that they will rail against for reasons that could be applied to the same authors that they're promoting. You know what I mean? I've read a lot of books that were making points that I actually really agreed with, but they were so on the nose and pretentious about it that it was unbearable. Reading that author's book felt a lot like pulling up a camp chair, sitting down and watching the author just stroke themselves in the corner and tell themselves how much of a good little boy or girl they are. How's that for a visual? A lot of people on here have asked me to read Discworld, and I will. What I do know about Discworld and the first book, The Color of Magic, is that it's very humor-oriented. I've heard that it's quite a fun and meant to be super funny fantasy series. And when you get a humor-oriented book, it is going to miss for a lot of people, because a sense of humor is one of the most subjective and polarizing things in the world, so I can imagine that this series is absolutely not for everyone. I bet I'm right. This book frustrated me to no end. Very near the beginning of it, I thought about throwing it across the room because I could not for the life of me follow a conversation on about page 6. I read and reread those pages to no avail. I finished the book because my husband told me it was wonderful and funny and I would really enjoy it. I didn't. Someone's husband's in the doghouse. You messed up, brother. There is a reason why Terry Pratchett said not to read this book. I found out the hard way. Wait, he said that? Hang on, I gotta look this up. The Color of Magic is advised against as it's the least typical Discworld book there is. It is fantastic, wonderful, hilarious, and parodic, but also unlike the rest of Discworld. Tried to read it for book club, hated it. Fantasy is just not my thing. Why did you read it, my dude? It's obviously a fantasy, this is something I've seen a few times and I don't understand it. Reading a book and finding that it's not for you for reasons that you feel you should fault is fine. That's okay. But if I was to say, I'm not a fan of romance books, and then I go out and I pick up a romance book. The cover says that it's romance, the title says that it's romance, the blurb on the back says that it's romance, it's written by a romance author. Why would I read it? And then why would I review it and give it 1 star and say, I don't like romance? Sorry, I don't like romance, 1 star. 1 star, I don't like romance. Like, come on, dude. If you don't like fantasy, don't read fantasy. So yeah, some readers and reviewers are pretty harsh. Sometimes it's pretty funny, like this one. But on a more serious note, I do think it's cringe when reviewers are unnecessarily cruel about a book. I think it's cringe when reviewers think that their Goodreads review is a stand-up comedy show and they need to be as like snarky and quirky as possible just to bag on the author. Like, go ahead and make your jokes, you know, it's all in good fun until the point where you are just actually being kind of a dickhead, you know? Like, you're just actually being mean. Like, authors do see these reviews sometimes and they're allowed to look at them. I don't think they should be commenting on bad reviews or engaging directly with people who have left a negative review. I don't think they should be doing that, but I do think they have every right to read the reviews. So when you're leaving your super funny review, just remember that that person could actually end up reading it. That's all. Anyway, thanks for watching, especially for watching through the whole video. You are my favorite. I make lots of videos about fantasy books, and I've made lots of videos about fantasy books. So if that's your kind of thing, then I would love it if you stuck around. Otherwise, I don't know, maybe I'll see you in the next one. Catch ya.